In the summer of 2014, Neil Lennon departed as Celtic manager. Familiar names such as Henrik Larsson and Roy Keane were amongst the favourites to replace the popular Irishman, but Norwegian Ronny Deila was announced by the club as new manager on the 6th of June. Fergal Harkin of Citigroup initiated the contact with Deila to let him know that Celtic CEO Peter Law was interested in speaking with Deila. Ronny said, "Majority shareholder Dermot Desmond wanted to meet me in London about coming in as the assistant manager. The idea was that I would start as the assistant and I would get to understand Celtic and the language a bit more. Then if the manager who I was working with did well and left, I would then become the manager." At this time, Peter Law was looking at doing some major cost cutting at Celtic. Rangers had gone bust and were in the lower leagues of Scottish football, and Law wanted a manager who didn't expect much of a budget to work with. At his former club Strømsgodset, Deila won the Norwegian title in 2013 without spending a single penny. His title-winning side was made up entirely of youth academy players and free transfers. This of course appealed strongly to Law, who pushed heavily for Deila to be appointed as manager after the attempts to land bigger names fell through. In the 2014 summer transfer window, cost-cutting at Celtic was implemented to a new level. The club sold goalkeeper Fraser Foster to Southampton for £10 million and replaced him with Craig Gordon on a free transfer. The Scottish international goalie hadn't played competitive football in 3 years at this point, and it was even at one stage thought that he'd retired from the game due to chronic injuries. But he was now the new number one at Celtic Park. The club proceeded to sign a number of youngsters on loan and didn't spend a single penny themselves on a transfer until deadline day, when they spent $2 million on Serbian striker Stefan Skepovic. The squad was so thin that they also completed the deadline day loan signing of Man City's Swedish striker John Guidetti, but left that transfer so late on that he couldn't be registered in time for European football. Speaking of European football, the early season qualifiers started pretty spectacularly poorly for Ronny. After dispatching of Icelandic outfit KR Reykjavik in the second qualifying round for the Champions League, Celtic were drawn against Legia Warsaw. The Hoops went 1-0 up in Poland early on, but lost the game 4-1. Fans were understandably reacting poorly, but most of the anger was directed at Peter Law for how poorly equipped and unprepared the squad was, rather than at Ronny himself. Due to Celtic Park being used for the Commonwealth Games, the return leg was held at Murrayfield in Edinburgh, and Celtic were once again played off the park in a 2-0 defeat. However, an unexpected and extraordinary retrieve came in the form of an 88th minute substitute made by Legia. The Polish champions brought on right back Bartosz Berezynski, who was suspended for the game and had not yet served his suspension as the club failed to include him in their squad registration for the second round matches. Despite being 6-1 up on aggregate with just seconds left in the tie, UEFA deemed that Legia had forfeited the tie by fielding an ineligible player and awarded a 3-0 victory to Celtic for the second leg. As such, the aggregate score was changed to 4-4 and Celtic advanced on the away goals rule. This fortunate scenario led to Celtic being given a favourable draw against Slovenian outfit Maribor in the playoff round to qualify for the group stage of the Champions League. After a 1-1 away draw in the first leg, Celtic were strong favourites to advance in the return fixture, now back at Celtic Park. Right from the start though, the performance was dreadful. Deila's team selection was baffling, dropping the legs of Jason Denayer and Lee Griffiths, and starting the legs of Joe Inge Berget, who just arrived on loan, and Anthony Stokes. Berget's performance here was so poor that his loan spell was cut short early. Maribor recorded a 1-0 victory, and Deila. So where exactly was it going wrong in these early stages? The team Ronny inherited from Neil Lennon was built firmly in Lennon's image and culture. Deila immediately criticised and set about to change the diet and lifestyle choices of the players. Under Lennon, players had no real dietary restrictions, weren't particularly discouraged from alcohol or nights out, and were frequently given days off from training. Deila was aghast to see the food options in the Celtic training canteen, and immediately banned fizzy drinks, tomato sauce and chips from the menu. Ronny wanted the Celtic players to reduce their body fat and suggested the players try a keto diet, high meat, low carb. Charlie Mulgrew claimed he successfully lost 6 kilos in a week on the diet, but also lost energy and stamina. Several senior players took badly to the change, in particular Chris Commons and Anthony Stokes. Commons deemed the diet draining and that it was too much all at once. Ronny defended the changes, stating they were not as conscious around nutrition and the concept of being a 24-hour athlete as we are in Norway. Quite frankly, it was shocking, but it had a lot to do with wider society in Britain and the diet norms. It's fried food, there's sugar in everything, alcohol, basically all the things that are the worst imaginable nutrition-wise. Celtic had appointed former club favourite John Collins as Ronny's assistant manager, who was also a long-standing advocate for players adhering to strict diet and discipline, but the pair clearly faced an uphill battle. Despite this, the squad lost a combined weight of 60 kilos. Domestically, things were also off to a poor start. The club won 4, drew 2 and lost 2 of their opening 8 league games. With no Rangers in the league, Ronny was lucky to be under very little pressure regarding the push for the title, but a 1-0 loss at home to Hamilton in October really intensified the pressure on the Norwegian. Club legends such as Chris Sutton and John Hartson were outspoken critics of Deila in the press, though notably both were close personal friends of former manager Neil Lennon, who was angered at Deila's perceived criticisms of his training and lifestyle management. So one school of thought was that the likes of Sutton and Hartson were looking out more for their old friend than they were for the good of the club. Ronny also changed shape. For the first time in club history, Celtic were now playing one up front domestically, setting up in a 4-2-3-1 formation for every game. Irish striker Anthony Stokes was frequently deployed as an inside left forward. Having spent the majority of his career playing as an out-and-out striker in a front two pairing, Stokes was frustrated at his new role and reluctant to adapt. With pressure on, and Aberdeen even starting to show signs of mounting a title challenge, a November trip to Pittodrie saw Celtic walk away with a 2-1 victory, courtesy of an 89th minute winner from Virgil van Dijk. The post-match Ronny roar was warmly received by the visiting fans, and Ronny himself was clearly relieved, stating it was orgasmic, if I can say that, maybe even better than that. Things improved gradually following this. The changes implemented by Ronny were starting to pay off, and Celtic were playing good to watch attacking football, largely blowing away domestic opposition. February was to prove a huge month which would help him begin to win round many of the doubters. First, Celtic met Rangers in the League Cup. It was the first time the clubs had met following Rangers' liquidation and the formation of the new co. All the pressure was on Ronny, as Rangers were playing in the second tier of Scottish football, and club legend Kenny Dalglish suggested a defeat should mark the end of Ronny Deila's spell as manager. After all the hype, Celtic went 2-0 up early thanks to goals from Lee Griffiths and Chris Commons, then proceeded to see the game out with ease in a fairly dull encounter truthfully. Still, with the Sharks circling hoping to see his team crumble, Ronny walked away with the glory on the day. Later in the month, in the Europa League knockout round, Celtic scored a stoppage time equaliser during a well-deserved 3-3 draw in a first leg tie at home to Inter Milan. In the away leg, Virgil van Dijk was harshly sent off after just 36 minutes at the San Siro, and Celtic were wrongly denied 2 penalty claims before an 88th minute winner for Inter sealed Celtic's fate. They were out of Europe, but the performances across the 2 legs earned a lot of plaudits for the players and for Ronny. The team went on to complete a League Cup and league title double, and were only denied a chance at a domestic treble thanks to a blatant handball in the box by Inverness in the Scottish Cup semi-final, which went unpunished by both the referee and linesman amazingly despite being in full view of the incident, and this helped Inverness to surprise 3-2 victory in extra time. Despite the rough start and frequent criticisms, things looked to be on the up for Celtic and for Ronny at the end of the season, with former critic Chris Sutton now openly supporting the manager as well as the vast majority of the fan base. But as has so often been the case, the board very quickly drained much of the enthusiasm out of the upcoming season with another poor summer transfer window. Star man Virgil van Dijk was sold to Southampton for a then club record £12.5 million, while decent fees were also brought in for Teemu Pukki and Adam Matthews. The incomings were nowhere near as costly, of course, and the likes of Jozo Simunovic, Dedrick Boyata and Nadir Chifchi were brought in for a spend of around £8 million. Once again, the most important games of the season came early on in the form of Champions League qualifiers, and once again the fans and manager looked to be let down by a severe lack of ambition and investment from the Celtic board. Just like that, the pressure was back on. In the first half of the 2015-16 season, domestic results largely remained strong, but Celtic's performance in the Europa League group stage was atrocious. 6 games, 0 wins, 3 draws, 3 defeats, finished bottom of the group. In October, Celtic lost 3-1 away to Norwegian outfit Molde, but the majority of fans were united in one thing. It was looking like Ronny Deila was not the right man for the Celtic job. League performances also dropped fairly dramatically in the second half of the season. The club were knocked out of the League Cup by Ross County, and the rigid style of possession-based 4-2-3-1 football was becoming mind-numbing to watch even when the side did record victories. Ronny's future was heavily in doubt. The January transfer window was an absolute joke. The club refused to invest heavily to help give Ronny any chance of turning things around, instead bringing in free transfers in the form of Carlton Cole and Colin Kazim Richards. Eric Sviatchenko was a positive addition, and a very young Patrick Roberts also arrived on loan from Man City, but it was beginning to feel like Ronny was on borrowed time, and he'd well and truly lost the dressing room, and that all momentum built at the end of the last season was gone for good. Then came April 17th, 2016. Celtic were drawn against second-tier Rangers in the semi-final of the Scottish Cup. Despite how poorly Celtic were performing, they were strong favourites to beat the Ibrox side, some even predicting a heavy defeat for Rangers that would help alleviate some of the mounting pressure for Ronny. Instead, the day turned into a nightmare for Celtic. They fell behind both in 90 minutes and an extra time for the game to end 2-2, before losing the penalty shootout when Tom Rogic skied the decisive penalty over the bar. The performance was an embarrassment, and it seemed like this dark day had to mark the end of the road for Ronny Deila. Indeed, just a few days later, on April 20th, Ronny announced he would be stepping down at the end of the season. Celtic sealed the title with a 3-2 win over Aberdeen on the 8th of May, but even this wasn't enough to change anybody's opinion on the miserable season. Now, it's important to note, it wasn't all negative under Ronny. Deila introduced a teenage Kieran Tierney to the first team squad at the end of his first season as manager, and turned him into a regular starter throughout the second campaign. Lee Griffiths also excelled as lead striker under Ronny in the 4-2-3-1 formation, and finished 2015-16 season with 40 goals. It was also Ronny who introduced Callum McGregor to the first team squad at the start of his time at Celtic, so despite all the issues faced, it was evident Ronny actually was a talented coach. Since leaving the club, opinions on Ronny Deila have softened, and he's generally remembered fondly. Maybe if he'd ever been backed in the transfer window, or didn't face such resistance from the dressing room for asking players to behave like full-time professionals, things would have been different. Maybe Ronny just came too early. But when Ronny left, it was the right time to leave. He went on to win the MLS title, so in addition to the Scottish and Norwegian leagues, that means he's one of relatively few managers in world football to have won 3 titles in 3 different countries. Ronny Deila at Celtic was an experiment that ended poorly, but it's unfair to say that it was an experiment that went wrong. It was something a bit different when the club could afford to try something outside the box. The problem may not have been Ronny, but the structure and squad around him. Wherever he ends up in the future, Ronny Deila will always have the support of the Celtic fans.